Welcome back to the Compassionate Capitalist Show. We're going to revisit a topic, but that I think it's never old to talk about branding and the role that it plays in establishing credibility in the marketplace, of creating authentic relationships with your customers, all of those kinds of things that kind of fall within the space of branding. Branding sometimes can be a confusing topic for companies. Is it marketing? Is it a logo? Is it what is branding? And my guest today, Kyle Duford, the brand leader, and that actually is their website, thebrandleader.com, is really an expert in this topic, and a very interesting conversation that we are going to have today. And I'm going to introduce him to you here in just a second. But let me just set the stage for exactly why you want to continue listening for the next 30 to 40 minutes of this show. So we have an interesting conversation that we plan where you're going to learn about branding for sure, but more importantly about the authenticity in brand and corporate culture and how that translates to your customer base, your customer loyalty, your employee retention, and financial success for your business. And whether you, my dear listener, are that founder, the CEO, or an investor, it's important stuff, because over the life of your company or that company that you've invested in, you're going to invest a great deal of time, money, resources, and strategy to establish your brand, particularly to be a trusted brand. And brand, it used to be what to a customer was what was little to do with corporate culture. It was just what they kind of knew you as. They sort of associated it with your product. But in this digital age, when information is shared at the speed of light and people have big issues that can be very personal to them, whether it's diversity, social justice, the environment, women's sexuality, sexual autonomy, just all of these issues become, hot spots in a flash, and can hurt a brand or expand a brand depending on what the news of the day is on that. And a brand crisis is likely not really going to hit your company or have a big impact when you're small and growing. And quite frankly, not very many people know about you. Your teams are small and tight, and everyone knows each other. They've got relationships that they've built. Being in an office where conflicts and differences can be worked out. But a brand crisis can manifest itself when you are big enough to grab the attention of the digital news, and when it can impact your value at the company at their exit and impact shareholder value. And it's something that as you grow and it becomes bigger, and you don't know all your people because of things that we've gone through in the last 18 months, to say in 2020, whether it's the pandemic, the raising of racial awareness and social justice, the Me Too movement that happened before that. All these things can wake up your teams, and all of a sudden people that you thought you knew are different than what you thought they were before. And how do you manage to that when you've got responsibilities to your investors and your shareholders to keep the ball moving forward and keep generating revenue? And Kyle Duford is an expert because he's dealt with this internally within his own company in navigating the embracing of diversity and acceptance of different cultures and different viewpoints. And then, but also when it comes to helping companies navigate, how do they establish an authentic brand? And then how do they make sure that they don't inadvertently do stuff to harm that? And when they do, how do you respond? And so let me tell you about Kyle, and then I'm going to actually let him talk. So Kyle Duford was the founding publisher and editor for American Tri magazine in 2001. It was dedicated to the pursuits of triathletes during the 2000s triathlon boom. And after successfully growing the magazine and selling it to a competitor, Duford stayed on to help grow that publication too. And later he served as a gear and travel writer for many notable magazines. If you're in that outdoor recreational space, called Outside, Men's Health, Men's Journal, many other men's and lifestyles and adventure publications. deep knowledge of this industry and growing brand awareness for that elusive digital media space and top of mind led him into consulting on lifestyle and active lifestyle brands and specializing in crafting outstanding experiences for global brands. Kyle's unique blend of design, branding, and digital best practices lends itself to creating and leading some of the foremost brands. And if you go to his website, thebrandleader.com, you will see logos of all of those big brands that he has worked with. So welcome, Kyle, to the Compassionate Capitalist Show.
Thanks, Karen. It's always a pleasure, but I've been looking forward to this one in particular for quite some time. So thanks for having me.
Very good. So, I mean, let's just start out with the ground floor, define a brand, how it is for your business and how you work with your clients and how it relates. And then we'll get into more of corporate culture and customer in specific and some examples. But in general, how do you help, companies identify brand and how is it important? Does it really translate to what their corporate culture identity is?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a loaded question, right? Everyone thinks they have an understanding of what a brand is. And you said it in the intro. We do believe that it's an emotional connection with a consumer and a business or product or its service, whatever that might be. It's not a logo. It's not how you look. It's not what you say. It is kind of the amalgamation of all those things together. So, we have these sales decks just like any other business would. And one of our slides says, David Ogilvy, who's an advertising giant from the 60s, said that a brand is really just the sum of all the intangible parts of a company. And so, but now people talk about a brand interchangeably with a business. And in many ways it's kind of the same. So it's how you present yourself. I always tell people, if you're at Starbucks, you get the same drink at Starbucks at one place as you do another place, not just in the country. You could be in Dubai, you could be in Paris, you could be in Des Moines, Iowa. And if you order a drink, it's going to come in the same cup. You're going to be treated in the same way. They call it the same thing. They might misspell your name the same way on the cup. All of those things add up. And it's customer service. It's all of those, touch points. It's really everything. And if you liken it to a person, it makes sense. It's how we present ourselves when we're meeting somebody. It's all those experiences. If I'm dishonest, that becomes part of my brand. If I hold myself with integrity, that becomes part of my brand. So it's really all those things. And you mentioned the digital age. Now it's becoming more evident to people what really a brand is and can be, because we have so much access to them these days.
Right. Well, it used to be when you would do damage control on the goodwill of a brand. I mean, it used to be goodwill became something on balance sheets and in financial statements that really mattered when it came time to exit or sell a company. It was sort of like, I always called it the fudge factor of what, the difference in the thing to balance it was this goodwill of their brand, right? And you think back in the days with the really big brand crises that we would know of is like Johnson and Johnson when they had their 1982 Tylenol crisis, right? Or
right.
Exxon Valdez in 1989 with the spill, or the Union Carbide pesticide plant explosion in India. And back then you would hear about it. You might not hear it, then they would have time to circle the wagons and create a story or how they would respond, and people would just see how they would respond. And they could, if they reacted with, they took ownership of the problem, they made changes, they showed, evidence that they were doing things different, that in all of those cases, they harmed the community around them, their environment, the people, their stakeholders. If you think about the term conscious capitalism, it's for CEOs and founders and executive teams to be aware of the impact that they have in their communities, with their employees, with their customers, with their vendors, and how do they treat them all. And that's something what maybe only in about 10 years has become something that's within our conversations that we have in a business community. But in this day and age, controversy can hit a business in an instant, and responding has to be fast, because lack of response is interpreted a whole different way. If you don't
Yep.
respond, then that becomes its own news cycle, right? And so
Absolutely.
let me give a recent example. It's been top of mind lately. Netflix, right? This is in
Mhm.
general an entity that their brand seems inclusive and diverse. They're more liberal than conservative when it comes to media. They're more secular than faith-based for sure. And their brand message actually on their website is, we want to entertain the world, whatever your taste, and no matter where you live, we give you access to the best in class TV shows, movies, and documentaries. Our members control what they want to watch, when they want, and with no ads in one simple subscription. Right? That's, pretty straightforward. And you
Yep.
would pretty much say that's, yep, that's Netflix, right?
Yep.
And I
Yep.
did a quick search. There's 215 titles that come up when you search on LGBTQ. And granted, probably less than half of them are actually 100% on topic versus a character inclusion or something like that. But still, you would seem to be a feather in their cap for inclusion as part of that brand image. And then there's this
Mhm.
situation that happened with the stand-up comedian special with David Chappelle, who, in
Right.
just a quick little business history there, February of this year, he successfully negotiated a new exclusive with Netflix because they had licensed his Comedy Central show and he wasn't getting paid for the royalties on that. So they took it off and then they renegotiated and he got full creative control to do this. And in his third one was called The Closer. It became very controversial in his monologue about specific. In his monologue, I encourage people, if you haven't seen it, to go watch it so you can form your own opinion. And we're not talking about the merits of the conversation. We're going to talk about just reaction, all right, and how it was handled. So he had a specific trans comedian he knew. Some of his jokes, he was telling a story about that relationship, and his jokes were offensive to a trans Netflix employees, which came out with a treat that, if you've ever heard of the Streisand effect, the Streisand effect is when you're trying to avoid something. So you try to say, don't post this or don't do this. And then what ends up happening is that everybody pays attention to that. So you say, don't do something, don't watch this, don't do this, whatever. Then everybody has to go and watch it and it amplifies it. Right. And so that's what
Right.
really happened. Because quite frankly, I may not have even watched the special had it not. And I was just trying to,
Exactly.
understand why it was controversial. Right. So what ended up happening is that activists jumped on the bandwagons and amplified the topic. And so this is what the Netflix employee tweeted. Yesterday, we launched another Chappelle special where he attacks the trans community and the very validity of transness, and all while trying to pit us against other marginalized groups. You're going to hear a lot of talk about offense. We are not offended. And that's when it went viral, right? And became part of this conversation about cancel culture. And on its own, it could have been handled. But when it goes into the public fray of digital interaction versus human interaction in real time, they're never handled quietly or resolved painlessly or effectively. And so Netflix went through this period of, they suspended the employee along with two other employees that supposedly tried to attend a board of directors meeting to confront them. And then another one, quit the company. And then it was just this whole big back and thing. And then they reinstated those suspended employees. And then Netflix has a trans support group. They announced that they were going to do a walkout. The employee that was arranging it was suspended. Of course, that becomes the new news cycle. They gave their list of demands, which was really, basically committing funds and efforts to hire trans people within their corporate community, to put trans talent in front of the camera and behind the camera, and just really try to elevate the participation and inclusion of trans within Netflix. Right. And they didn't want anything to be canceled or enhanced. They just wanted more participation. Right.
Right.
So they had fired the organizer. Then the walkout was paid leave. Finally, Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos He didn't respond to the walkout directly, but he did a public Wall Street Journal interview. And he says, I'm firmly committed to continue to support artistic freedom for the creators who work with Netflix and increase representation behind the screen and on camera. Interesting. The walkout included all sorts of communities. It was the trans within the LGBTQ, but also Black Lives Matter advocates. There was a lot of folks. We saw their posters if you go and do that. So, Kyle, I don't want to, again, talk about the content of the monologue. It's more about handling diversity as it relates to the brand and the power of that employee voice. We have seen similar instances of internal leaks related to Google within their handling of female employees at Amazon as well. You know, the idea of Amazon having this kind of male dominated predatory sort of an environment. There's been stuff that's come out. There's been other tech companies. Facebook has had their own big issues that have come out relates. So when it relates to handling diversity within a company and being inconsistent with their external image, their front comes to light and execs scramble to respond and explain. So what, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that we can play, you know, Monday morning quarterback and say the CEO should have handled it this way or that way or any of that kind of stuff. The thing I really kind of wanted to get into was when Netflix or these other big companies like that, and they try to do the right thing by creating a voice with this, like they had this trans group. So internally, clearly, they are trying to create something that is, it creates an inclusive environment that would be consistent with their brand of whatever you want to watch on TV and this kind of stuff. So it's like they created this group, but then they don't really listen to, there's a disconnect in the communication internally. And then it becomes something that's amplified for the external to understand. Customers would never know about that, but now all of a sudden they know about that. So can you address sort of where the process, I guess, or the line, like, would they have been better off if they never had a trans communication group? Because then they just would have been just like most other companies, you know, versus trying to do the right thing, but not necessarily having it fully integrated, you know, that kind of a, and it would relate to racial issues when it comes to, you know, the NFL has it right now with people of color represented in their management and how the players are treated. I mean, every big organization will address this at some point in time where it when the inside gets turned outside, all of a sudden people go, oh, I didn't know that they did that internally like that.
You know, I mean, again, you just threw a lot at me there, but it's one of those things where I believe we're in a day and age where it's very clear that there's no longer this massive wall between our personal lives and the business world. And for better, for worse, we're not going to get into that. But what's been very evident is that behind that wall, behind the business veil, it's really just a microcosm of society. So if you see trouble out in our personal life for people who might disagree with us or aren't as inclusive or, you know, are racially motivated or, you know, whatever, all these social issues that are seemingly come to light, they've always been there. They've just been behind a wall that people just didn't see. And look, for lack of a better description, I think when you're naive to something, it's easier to just pretend it doesn't exist. So I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of businesses are being more exposed because you have people on whatever side of whatever issue there might be, that person inside of your business has access to the world, and they have that access through social media, through the internet, through postings, through blogs, whatever, through a podcast. It doesn't matter what it is. And so now we're seeing a lot of the stuff that's internal, which has always been there. We've always been this awfully prejudicial country in whatever aspect, ageism, faddism, you know, homophobia. It doesn't matter. It's always been there. It shouldn't be there, to be clear, from my point of view, but it is. Now we're just seeing it. And like I likened brands and businesses to people earlier, and I'll do it again now. How you respond to something, it just reflects who you are. It reflects the integrity of the business. There might be good intentions behind something, but that doesn't excuse behavior. You might not be at fault for something, but you're still responsible. And so when you're at the head of Netflix, and you outlined a lot more of the story than I heard, I kind of was disgusted by it and turned it off. So that listening to the news part, but so I didn't hear the trans group get together. I didn't hear any of that stuff. But what I can tell you is two things happened. One is they decided, again, for better for worse, board of directors, CEO, whoever it was, that this was going to be our stance. And then the other side is we, as people who use Netflix, have a decision if we want to accept that apology or not, or use their service or not. And to me, that's where it comes down to. We have to look at these issues in business on how and we're not publicists, we're not we're not PR people at all, but when it comes to the issue of brand, you look at this and say, what is the value of this business or service? So what is the value of Netflix? What do they stand for? What do they mean? They clearly no longer mean just access to everybody in the whole world to watch whatever they want, because we saw with Squid Game taking down servers in Korea or wherever it was, and all these things. I mean, people now are assimilating themselves into a culture that Netflix is proliferating. So they have a higher social responsibility than maybe the barber down the street who doesn't let somebody in their building.
Very good point.
It's you become part of the public domain when you're that big. And when Netflix has kind of become this behemoth of culture, you have a different set of responsibility. As soon as you walk outside your house, you have a different set of responsibility. You are representing not just yourself, but your family and your children and where you come from and what you believe in. And so like I said, it just shines a light on it in a completely different way. And yeah, somebody somewhere made a decision to do something, and they might be second guessing themselves or not. That's not for me to guess or decide. But in those instances, they have this paramount social responsibility to stand for something. And I think the naivety comes in, Karen, when these businesses think that this is not a big deal, because then you're also just basically translating or not translating. What's the word I want? You're basically showing everybody that you have no awareness at all. You're not reading the room. And then it comes to bear, well, CEOs, do they have the pulse of normal America when they're making millions of dollars for their salary and so forth and so on? So it just becomes a slippery slope. So you can boil it down to the fact that really, do they have a bigger responsibility than anybody else because they are such large brands that are part of our daily lives? Does Apple or Facebook or Netflix or Google or Amazon have a larger responsibility than even large businesses like Pepsi or Coke or Nike or what? You know what I'm saying? So you have to just be aware of it. Now, I'm not going to say you have to do a certain thing or another. You have to do what you believe in, and I can make a decision whether I use your product or not. But you have to be aware of the situation these days. And my son walked into the room, I think yesterday, and said, "Hey, Mom, I'm struggling with something. I'm watching Seinfeld episodes from the 90s, and they're saying some stuff that I don't believe in." And it's crazy. And you just go, things that that I probably laughed at, you just kind of, it's like, but I think there was this kind of collective, like I said, naivety. And you laugh at things that either made you uncomfortable or you didn't know much about, or, and I'm proud to have trans friends. I'm proud to have, gay friends. I'm proud to have, my daughter's half African-American. She was adopted. There's so many different parts of society that are so beautiful if you pay attention to it. But when you don't, you get yourself stuck in these situations and you don't know how to get out of. Instead of saying, you know what, I don't know, help me understand, because I don't understand it. So I don't really answer your question, but it's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. That was perfect, Kyle. It's kind of, it's sort of, when does a company, because I had a friend of mine who's high up in a technology company that's not a consumer facing technology company. It's just one of those companies that make things that we kind of buy and you just sort of know. I don't want to say their name. And he got tapped. I think he's like it might be something to do. I'll just say like the computer stuff for e-cars, something that's kind of in that space, right? And he got tapped to lead and create a racial diversity communications group, sort of like this. And he's a white male, 40 something, right? And he got tapped to be able to create that because they wanted to give their African American and people of color employees feel like they had a sounding board or something to listen, or if there was things that were not the things that were happening that they didn't feel like they could take to their supervisor, they would have a safe place, right? And so that, of course, happened in 2020 when there was a lot of attention on a lot of the things that were going on, and particularly because of the Black Lives Matters marches and stuff. And I wonder, sometimes, like in this case with Netflix, is a company, if they're, I don't quite know how to ask this question. It's if a company is feels like they should do something because they do have those types of folks within their community, and they know that it's important to their consumers. Is it enough or dangerous? Like, which is it? It's like if you just do something like that, like we don't know, like in this case of Netflix, had that trans communication group been saying, this is what we want, you need to have more, people that are, represented, you need to have, more whatever, you need more, have more management, you need to have, or whatever, you know what I mean? Had they already been voicing it, or was it they just talking amongst themselves? You know what I mean? Were they having an engagement? So when it comes to, if a brand is saying that we have this as part of our character, our corporate culture, is that we value our diverse customers, we value our diverse, and our brand represents acceptance. I don't know, that then, is it lip service and enough? Because then you check a box of the corporate community, and the stockholders and the board of directors can say they check the box, and then you risk this kind of a thing? Or is it a necessary stepping stone, and everybody sort of is evolving, just like our awareness that these are issues are evolving?
You love the loaded questions, don't you?
I do. I'm sorry.
I think it's kind of both. I applaud people trying to do something to bridge the gap between, naivety and awareness. I think that's important. But, and look, I'm a white guy. I was raised what to a lot of standards would be privileged, even though I thought I was very, we didn't have money growing up, but I realized that I had privilege just by being born into the skin I have, by a father who was, decently wealthy, but divorced my mom and left her with nothing, but whatever. I'm not sore about that or anything. Yeah. And so it's hard to speak on this. I think just listen. And if in this situation, and I'm making this situation up, but in a situation where there's an issue with trans people, why would a non-trans white male decide what other people need to know? It just seems very bizarre to me, So it would be hard for me to say, you know what, we're going to have an office meeting. We're going to talk about why there's not a lot of minorities or non-Caucasian in the graphic design world, which is true. I'm not going to speculate as to why, but why the hell? What gives me the right to talk about that? Right? It just seems weird to me, because that's just another way of showing you think you have privilege or knowledge that other people don't possess. There's far more people more smart than I am, and you see I just illustrated my point. I should say smarter than I am. Again, you look at Wall Street, you look at publicly traded companies, you look at these big businesses that are dominating our lives, our digital lives, our phones and everything, and they're run primarily by, and there've been a lot of strides more towards women in leadership, but still not enough. And think about how far it's taken, how long it's taken us to get to a point where there's female leaderships at the C-suite level. I mean, I can tell you, I know more smart women than men. So I've never understood that. And you're talking, gender equality has come so far and has so far to go. And yet now we're just beginning to have this kind of second wave of talking about racial inequality and equality and getting there. And now it's it's not for me to decide. And I have to continue to say that, but it just seems bizarre to me that I think we're asking the wrong questions because we're asking from our white privileged mind what we think our white privileged people can tolerate learning about non-white privileged people, you know? Um, I would like to learn. I want to be an open book. And by nature of how I was raised, I'm inherently closed off to an extent because I wasn't raised in a certain way. But I can learn. I can ask the right questions, and if I ask the wrong question, I can be corrected. You bring up Netflix and this big thing. Let's look at Hulu for a second. Hulu has one of my favorite programs on. It's called I think it's called Work in Progress. It's about a to her admission, an overweight, older lesbian character, primary character, written by her, directed by one of the Wachowski sisters, formerly a Wachowski brother.
Oh,
It has a transgender, secondary character in it, adorable character, and they talk about the issues without. How do I want to say this? It's just like it's life. It's just like look at these people for who they are, and you
right.
learn so much about them. And it's such a fun show because everyone deals with the same issues at heart, and we're the same people. We're humans, and so I say all that to say, I think we just need to kind of take a breather. And cancel culture, whatever. That's going to be a lot of people just who want to just do a lot of things out there and say whatever. What it omits is the opportunity for us to have conversations, to have people at our
Right.
table, to talk about what makes us different. And when we listen to people who are different than us or similar to us, but have different stories or different backgrounds, man, that's the fun of life for me. So I don't really understand why things happen, but I can tell you this: if we were honest from a business standpoint, from a brand standpoint, and said, "Look, we made a mistake. We don't we don't know what the right answer is. We don't know if we should cancel Dave Chappelle or send him to counseling or have a transgender group. We don't know, but we're making a commitment to find out. And if that is honest and that
Right.
is authentic, I think people would believe them, because we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
But it feels like, oh, let's just put the token um the token BIPOC person in here, the token transgender person, and let's have them figured out. That just seems just as disillusional as anything else that we're dealing with. And then you hope the news cycle moves on. I'd much rather be on the ground having great authentic conversations with people that matter, and let's watch those people rule the world one day, because they're the ones who have gone through hell and back because of people like the rest of us. So yeah, like I said, I don't know the answer, but I can tell you I'm doing my best to figure it out.
I think you're spot on there, Kyle, that with the recognizing, personally recognizing what the bias that we bring to it as white men and women when we're having these straight men and women, as we're having these
Mm-hmm.
conversations, or trying to figure out what does it mean to have an inclusive, because there are life experiences, and that was kind of where it went on that. Their life experiences are completely different than our life experience, because their
Right.
lens of which they experience life is completely different. And I think part of when you and I first got connected and we talked about John Pavlovich's book, The
Mm-hmm.
Bigger Table, and part
Right.
of that is that whole thing about that is really understanding the different viewpoints and trying to find sort of that common ground. So I want to pivot just a little bit and kind of talk about that, because we went through a tough time with you, like with for your company, and how you have helped some of your clients. So, you come through, we're kind of leading into 2019. There's these issues are hot. They're out there. They're not new. Like you said at the very beginning, they're not stuff, and they may or may not be something that we bring to the workplace or not work to the workplace. But then all of a sudden 2020 hits. We're no longer in our workplaces. We're working virtually.
Right.
So some of that stuff that you might, and people also somehow felt, a lot of people felt like they didn't have to have the filters anymore that they used to have when they would be good corporate citizens in the workplace, or they didn't want to offend Mary that's in the cubicle next to them or something like that with some kind of offhanded comment they were making on the phone or whatever, you know what I mean? They would just,
Yep.
it was more of I think I feel like a sense of awareness of who is around you and how, what's my best behavior to put on for today, that kind of we saw sort of go away a little bit in 2020. And then as you come back into 2021 and we're starting to resume business, and you discover that you just thought before you had big issues of ratio of blacks to whites or men to women or women in executive positions, all that kind of stuff. And it became much more granular in some cases, even the difference in different kinds of versions of Christianity, if you will. And what does
Yeah.
it mean to be a Christian versus just, not just Christian and Jews or, something. It's just really what, that in your environment and how do you respect the different people's views. And then, politics became so much amplified than what it ever really had been before. That was and people's feelings really like on their sleeves, so to speak. So
Yeah.
for you yourself as a servant leader that has this heart for your own employees and the diversity that they represented within your team, did you see a shift like when you guys started to come back, that there was a difference in feelings that you had to have an open conversation with to get everybody kind of on the page so they could focus on business itself and what the goals of the organization is? And have you had to then help some of your customers do the same when it came to making sure that the brand stayed on track as they navigated out of 2020?
Yeah. The biggest thing that we learned as a business and as a group of people who spend, a good portion of our life together here in the office was that it kind of really goes back to what we just talked about, is that we don't know what people are going through. We don't know what happens at home. We don't know if they're in a safe place or if they're healthy, what kind of situation they're in. And when you look at things like drug abuse went up and home spousal abuse had, because clearly people were locked at home. The people who were home alone and had no one to talk to, depression rates were high, suicide rates were high, long before we even talking about the fact that so many people lost their jobs and so many businesses went out of business and people didn't know where to go. And it just put a humanizing factor on this. My wife and I talked about this a lot because, you can look back in history and say, never were we ever globally doing the same thing at the same time. We're in the same situation. And you can even look at the world wars and say, well, even then there were some countries that weren't part of it or weren't affected somehow, even if there were tertiary countries, but literally this hit every major population. And while we did see a lot more deaths and COVID cases in really urban African-American communities, for the most part, and I'm not a scientist, I don't want to quote stats, but I do know that was prevalent. COVID hit everybody. Didn't matter who you are, old, young, gay, straight, black, white, didn't matter. And there's a commonality through that. And then you kind of strip all that crap away and you look at our situation. And I was incredibly blessed. I had 5 of my 6 children with me for the 6-week stay-at-home order. I was able to work from home. I was able to work with our clients and with our staff. I was even able on some occasions to take food to some of our employees and leave it on their step. And it did not affect me in a way that it unfortunately infected a lot of people, even people in my own family. So I was incredibly blessed by that. And I don't want to speak for people who were in really bad situations. However, saying that, I can say that I did see people that work for us who live alone or who live with their parents or live with their elderly parents or had to deal with the stress of not knowing how we were going to do as a business and were we going to stay afloat and could we pay them? And that stuff is real. And for us, it brought us all closer together. I'm a Christian. I believe in the Lord. and a lot of us here do, but not everyone does here in the business, and then that's okay. But one of the things that I, so speaking about a bigger table, one of the things that I realize is that um, my wife always says, and look, she is definitely smarter than me, talking about smart women earlier. She's 10 times smarter than I am. But we always talk about it's not just opening up a bigger table. It's not even our table to, to think it's ours. It's the Lord's table. It is a table that offers commonality to everybody. And once we get our head around that we don't control life, and clearly the last 18-24 months has shown us that, then I think we can start to understand that it's in the suffering, it's in the pain that we can relate to one another. And if I get too deep on this, I will cry in the show, and I don't want to. But it's there where I can really appropriate myself to the people who were unable to find work and unable to live their life or live authentically. I mean, my heart breaks for those who were in abusive relationships and couldn't get out, or in substance abuse relationships who couldn't get out. Again, some people that I know who were in those worlds, and we couldn't help them. And it just breaks my heart, So in your question of returning to the office, I think we as a business returned stronger, and we were able to still give people bonuses that year and still give people an opportunity to come back to work. For a long time, we were able to let people who felt more safe at home stay at home. We're a creative agency, so it's harder to work collaboratively when you're separated by a computer monitor. It's easier to walk over and just have a hallway conversation, but we did allow that. I'm proud to say that on the back of this, we realized that after 23 years, our mother maternity policy was insufficient. And so we made and I've only been here for a few years, but we made a conscious decision to change our policy to a paid parental leave policy, not just for mothers, but for fathers as well, for adoptive parents. No matter what your gender, you have a new child. I'm not even going to say baby, because if you adopted a 6-year-old, you get the same benefits. Some of those things that really spoke to us in a way that we were like, how can we help our own people? So, and it brought us closer together in the sense that I saw some of our young kids who were just out of design school and 22 and living at home. And I saw what one particular guy in specific who I'm thinking about, how he was able to serve some other folks on his team. And that's what I love to see. I love to see this glimpse of godliness in people and I think it was shown all over the world by people of faith and not of faith, but who had this common thread of decency and realized that we had to come together and help people. So to get to your original question of how brands and businesses that we work with went through it, we're lucky to be able to call the shots with businesses that we want to work with. We only work with businesses that we want to work with. We're in a very good place of privilege to choose that right now, and we have to believe in the products they're selling. Like we're not gonna rebrand a cigarette company, for example, or a porn company. That's not what we're about. So we get to choose the businesses, and those leaders, those CEOs, and those C-suites or founders or directors of the marketing teams and the people that we worked with. We saw some incredible people do incredible things for their companies and for their employees. And I'm proud to say that I wouldn't have done anything differently on those teams. So businesses that have come to us after the pandemic, a lot of them realized that they had to rebrand because they changed their policies like we did, or they changed the number of people they hired, or they made a permanent work from home option. All of those things are so wonderful that we listened. And it's not unlike with the onset of your program, when we started talking about how do we handle differences and things. You just got to listen. And it's unfortunate that a pandemic kind of takes us to our knees and forces us to look in the mirror. But I think a lot of good people did a lot of good things on the back of that. So I just hope it sticks. I hope that table remains open to anybody, because that's where the magic is. That's why I get up in the morning.
Yeah. Well, I think you said it there, Kyle, with all of that really it comes down to communication. So brand, creating your brand, sustaining your brand, evolving your brand, we have often thought communication with your potential customer, the outside world, but what you just described is being authentic in the way that you communicate internally within your business about the values you bring that you want to have associated with your brand, and listening, being
Yeah.
aware. I don't know what I don't know, but or this is what I think I know, but educate me, and figuring out and just listening and seeing when it comes to your teammates, your employees, the people that you work with, seeing them for the humans that they are. So I
Oh,
think that's
absolutely.
really,
Absolutely.
that was really spot on. Anything that you want to add as we wrap up here that we haven't yet talked about that you were hoping to express, or you had an aha moment, say, oh, I meant to say this.
Gosh, we covered so many different things, didn't we? And yet they were all the same thing at the same time. No, I think that the only thing I can say, if we want to circle this back around to brand a little bit, is just that brands have it might look, this might sound a little silly and a little kumbaya, but I really truly believe that brands have the power to change people because they're so prevalent, and because and I just spoke on this at a conference recently, that I think we talked about that emotional connection between a brand and its end consumer. And really, if you think about the brands that you're engaged with, and you think about, speaking of the pandemic, there's lots of people who didn't see a soul but interacted with the brands like Amazon, for example, or DoorDash or Shipped or something. And I think that sometimes, and actually I know this because we did the research on it, there's a lot of people who were home by themselves, and the only people they spoke with or had conversation with were customer service agents. And
Yeah.
brands have an opportunity and almost a moral obligation to be real, to be authentic, to be leading the way at how we treat one another. I mean, we're only my grandma used to say we're going to hell in a handbasket, and I think we're only accelerating that process with the issues we're seeing, and the shootings, and it's awful. And I think we all share a commonality, obviously, between one another as humans, but we all share Amazon now, we all share Apple, we all share those brands become the linchpin between us, and they have an obligation, whether it's data privacy or taking the lead on social, economical, and racial integration. I think they have a responsibility to show us the way of what's right. And I think that's going to be an interesting challenge for them as we continue on in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Kyle. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Great conversation, and encourage everybody, please go check out the brandleader.com. And there's probably a contact page there for people to get in touch with you and stuff like that. And you have your own podcast as well, right?
Yeah, we've got two little podcasts. One is solely for leaders in the outdoor space, and that's called the Crux Podcast. You can find that wherever you're listening to this. We had got one that is infrequent but very good, and that is our own Brand Leader podcast. Again, you can find that same space. And that's a little bit more about branding and the things we started talking about today.
Okay. Very good. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please give us the 5 stars. Share this with somebody you think will find it valuable. And please visit KarenRands.co to get more information and connect with me on the contact page and learn more about what we do for entrepreneurs and investors. Again, thank you, Kyle, very much for being on the show. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, thanks for having me so much.
Yeah. Onwards and upwards.